I don't see the red button. Hang on. Okay, take it away, Rick.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Rick Treitman. I'm entrepreneur in residence at Adobe. I'm actually calling in from Boston, where I live, and I wanted to tell you that University of New Mexico, this is one of those visits that I wish I was making in person, because I spent a number of summers on campus at University of New Mexico in Las Vegas when I was a kid, because my dad earned his master's degree while he was teaching science. In the summers, we would all jump in a trailer and go to Las Vegas, where he earned his master's degree. So you guys live in an enchanted land for sure. So what I want to talk to you today about is a problem that is universal, certainly across the United States. It's not going to take you guys by surprise, but also we think across the world, and that is that when we go to measure our students' proficiency in reading at grades 4, 8, and 12, we're finding that only about a third of them are reading at grade level. And when we look at adults, we find that a majority of our adults in this country are reading below the sixth grade level. The Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy has put a cost to this problem of $2.2 trillion. And a lot of this cost is really an individual cost to people who can't build a better life for themselves, who can't get a better job or advance in their careers because of this reading problem. So as technologists, we always look at problems and say, do we have any technology that can help make this better? And we often just look at, what would be the coolest solution, and the coolest solution would just be to have these magic reading glasses that turned everybody into a reader. What if we could just take people to a reading doctor and give them a test and give everybody their own set of glasses, and give them reading tests where we changed the formatting of the text to see if that made any difference. We might start to stretch it out in different ways, or we might start to make it smaller. And for those of you who work in this area, you probably know that what I'm starting to approximate right now is a problem that many people have. Some people call this dyslexia, some people call it crowding, or a variant of dyslexia. But for many people, when they try to tease characters apart, they all seem to sort of land on top of each other. And this crowding phenomena has been identified for over 100 years, but one that makes it very hard for people to learn to read, and even hard for people to read at any speed. Now imagine if you suffer from this crowding problem and the text is small, or imagine if you're looking at a weird font. You can see that this is practically unreadable, and yet this is what a lot of people look at when they look at a normal page. Now, what I'm showing you right now is an approximation of the first typeset of the font from the first typeset page we know about in Western civilization anyways, which is Gutenberg's Bible. And even if I could read Latin, I think that I would have a lot of trouble myself as a good reader teasing these characters apart and trying to read what I'm looking at. But if I had a way to manipulate the text, if I could start to stretch it out and make it bigger, or even change the font, I think what you see here is a dramatization of the kinds of changes we can make in readability when we can take control of the text and start to shape it to an individual reader's needs. And what I'm talking about here is a set of theories that a small organization called Readability Matters has been working on and researching for about 15 years. And they brought their findings to Adobe, I think about 4 years ago at this point. And their theory is very simple. It's basically, if you can take text and give readers control over it, if they can change the font or the size of the font or the spacing between the lines, or for those people who suffer from crowding, that spacing between the characters themselves, you can start to make a real difference in how people read. So in fact, electronically, we can approximate this magic pair of reading glasses that we've been talking about. And we at Adobe took their their ideas and built a prototype. And this is a prototype that we built about 3 years ago, running on an iPad with some early technology that we were using that turned into what we now call liquid mode. And what it does is allows us to take a PDF, the original you see there on the left. We put a prototype UI on it that allowed a user to change a bunch of aspects of the formatting. And so that we were able to take a document that looked like this and turn it into one that looked like this. And we took it to a school in South San Jose and tested with about 80 students in the 3rd and 7th grades. I'm going to show you the results of our 3rd grade testing. So we started with the fluency test that these kids were taking every month. And we found that we had, the fastest student in the 3rd grade was reading really well at about 163 words a minute. And the slowest was reading 100 words a minute slower. And you can see there's some cohorts here, and we've got this guy really hanging out at the at-risk category and having a very hard time reading. We were testing at the end of March. And so that means that a California child would have been in school for about 7 months. And normally we expect a child in the 3rd grade to increase their words per minute in this particular test by about 1 word a week. This guy was flatlined. He had not changed from day 1 to the end of March. He was getting reading intervention. He was working with a reading specialist. His parents were reading to him at home. And nothing really seemed to help. They kept giving him books with larger and larger fonts, but he continued to really struggle. When we used our prototype and found we didn't have an infinite number of formats. We had maybe a half a dozen in each grade. But when we found the format that came closest to helping each student, we saw increases in that fluency yield that looked like this. So what you see is this guy that we were really worried about in the at-risk category, jumping 27 words a minute into really a whole new cohort and jumping ahead of where some of the baseline kids were in the original test. And beyond that, his teachers were very excited because, and we have audio tape of this, he went from sort of sounding out a word at a time to reading with meaning and reading with inflection. You could hear in his voice that he understood what he was doing, and he was also visibly relaxed and much more comfortable in the reading. But the other cool thing that this chart shows is that although our slowest student jumped 27 words a minute, the exact same increase in word count happened with the fastest. And the takeaway from this slide is that small changes in text attributes help all readers. We are not positioning this as we're just going to go out and help the struggling reader, but we in fact think that giving people control of their reading formats helps everybody across the reading spectrum. Now, another way to look at this data, I told you a few minutes ago that the average 3rd grader increases their words per minute by about 1 word per week. These kids jumped on the median about 20 words in by having their custom format. So that 1 word per week, you would expect that kind of improvement to take place over 20 weeks of the school year. And yet we did it in roughly a minute by finding the right set of reading settings for each child. 50% of the class hit that mean, of course, and 80% of the class accelerated by 10 words or 10 weeks or more. We saw similar acceleration in grade 7, not quite as dramatic. In the first place, because these kids were reading on average in the 75th percentile, and also because this particular fluency test, as many of you probably know, has the child read out loud, and you can only speak so quickly. So you have a bit of a cap on how much you can measure with this particular test, particularly with older, more accomplished readers who are already pretty good. So in this test, we had 5 aspects of the text formatting that we could change. Obviously, we could change the font itself, the size of the font, that character spacing and line height. And then the last one might look a little weird. Character stretch is the ability to actually distort the character. And early research that Readability Matters has done says that if you can actually stretch the character a little bit for some people and make it a little bit fatter, it can help. And so that's what that does. So we think that this magic pair of reading glasses and this individual pair of reading glasses is certainly attainable. And on the basis of our testing and other research we've been doing, we have put this into the free version of Adobe Acrobat for mobile devices. We now call it Liquid Mode. It's available in the various app stores for both iOS devices and Android devices, all the way up through Play Store compatible Chromebooks, which means a Chromebook on which you can install an app. Excuse me. And so this has been available since last summer. We first shipped it, and we're getting really good pickup on it. A lot of people are using it and really like what it does. Let me show you how it works. This is one of our first research papers that we did on readability and variable formatting. And if I were to give this to you and you were to pull it up on your phone and be faced with this 2-column academic paper, which I'm sure a lot of you spend a lot of time reading, you would do one of 2 things. You would either start pinching and zooming and panning around and losing your place. And what most of us do at this point is say, I'll wait until I get to my desktop and I'll read it on a screen where I can read it. But if you now invoke liquid mode, and I hope some of you have found it already, we reflow the document to fit the window. So now in liquid mode, I've gotten rid of the 2 columns. I've got a slightly more text. I can flow it, slightly larger text. I can flow it down the window, and it looks better. But if I start to customize it with the reading settings, I can make it even better. So we're going to punch up the font size a little bit and increase the character spacing, and of course the line spacing. And so now I end up with a document that looks like this, which works for me. Let's see if I can get back. So, this is where we were when we invoked liquid mode. This is where we ended up when we customized it. And what we also do with liquid mode is we make that customization sticky so that once you've found the formatting that works for you, next time you invoke liquid mode, you'll be looking at the document in the same way. Here's another example that's from some of our field testing. We found we've been working a lot with adult education populations. In this case, we were working with an adult ed group in Maryland who were working with recently arrived immigrants, many of whom had not learned to read in their home country and needed to learn English. And many of them wanted to apply for a commercial driver's license as a way of starting to get into a profession. And when they, and also, I think the thing that's important about these adult learner populations is many of them don't own laptops or large screen devices. All they have is a phone. And when they went to download the Maryland driver license manual that they needed to study from, and they used as a learning material to learn to read, they ended up looking at something that looked like this, which again, you're going to end up at the pinch and zoom level, and it's pretty bad. So with liquid mode, they were able to reflow it and even apply their own formatting to it. And so you can see that this is something you can actually use to teach reading now, as opposed to the original PDF. Now, we think that we're sort of just getting started. If I'm honest, I'll tell you that this is that liquid mode is cool, but it's got a long way to go. And one of the first, some of the first questions that people ask are, yeah, that's great, but how do I find my format? And you go back to the example that I gave of Gutenberg. We've been reading typeset, fixed typesetting, sort of one size fits all, since the mid 1400s, and we've dived into it as scientists and researchers and psychologists since probably the 1900. We've had a long time to study how people read fixed text, but we've not had that much time relatively to read digital text, particularly digital text with controls. And we have controls on our Kindles, and we have controls in Microsoft's immersive mode, and now you've got some controls with PDF, but we really don't know how to apply them. So for example, we know that individual formats help people, but how many formats are there? Are there half a dozen that fit everybody, or is it an infinite number of formats? There are more fonts out there than any of us can probably count. Which ones are the most readable fonts, and how individualized is that? And then the big question that everybody asks is, how do we help people find their optimal format? They're not going to all be able to go to this magical reading doctor to determine the format. So we need to find a way to do that. And then something that's kind of, just jumped up in the last year since we started. We found that a lot of kids who weren't able to attend school regularly or at all during COVID have lost a lot of ground in reading. And can we use any of our research or any of our tools to help close that learning gap that has affected so many of our learners? So in order to do that, Adobe and Readability Matters and the University of Florida are working together, and we've established a new virtual reading laboratory at the University of Central Florida. It's under the direction of Dr. Ben Sawyer, and it's our whole purpose at the VRL is to study this new mode of learning and of reading, and to study the effects of individualization on reading. The goal here is to bring as many people together as possible. There's a concept in business called creating social value, and it happens when industry and education and nonprofits and even government all get together and work to solve a societal problem. And if we've got a $2.2 trillion reading problem, it's one that we all really want to solve together. And so we've got an open invitation for any people, educators, researchers, to come and join us in this effort. We are building a whole set of virtual reading tools that people can take advantage of, and starting to field research not only with students but with adults. One of our first pieces of research just looked at whether we could affect reading speed in adults simply by changing the font. And we found that, in fact, we could, and that 127 words a minute can turn into something like 10 pages an hour for a good reader, that a good reader can add to their reading load. So I think that I'm missing a slide, but what I did want to talk about, there it is. I had skipped over it. This is our virtual readability lab, which lives on the web. Some of you may be familiar with Harvard's Lab in the Wild. We modeled this after that. And a lab in the wild is basically a framework for research. And our virtual readability lab contains all of the tools that a researcher needs to undertake a particular study. What you see here are the 3 studies that we have running right now, where people can determine their favorite font and then find out if it's their fastest font. And our research tells us that what you like is not necessarily what's best for you, and then can determine their best spacing. But the way we've built this lab is so that anybody who wants to do research can plug their research into this space, take advantage of our normed reading passages, and our data collection and other tools that we're building, to do that research. So an example of that is this reading ruler study that we recently completed and are working on to extend. So in this case, Adobe has something that we call Hack Week, and during Hack Week we turn our mostly our engineers, but also some of our product managers and designers loose for a week to pursue a passion project. And one of our engineers is a dyslexic reader. She likes all the work that we're doing in liquid mode, but wanted to see if a highlighter could be added to liquid mode to help her fellow dyslexic readers. And we were able to, while we did it, we went ahead and added non-dyslexic readers to the mix. We wanted to know what the design of the highlighter would look like, and decided to test 4 different methods of highlighting lines with both dyslexic readers and non-dyslexic readers. Now, she only had a week to do this, and if she had had to build this experiment from scratch, it would have probably taken a few months. But because the virtual reading lab was available to her, she was able to conceive, design, mount her study, and complete it within a week, which is really pretty cool. And so what we did was we studied these 4 different modes to see how people would whether or not they would improve, and if they improved or went backwards, with which method did they do so. And what we found was that just about everybody that we tested, and we tested 35 participants, can benefit from some kind of a ruler. It turns out that people with dyslexia benefited well from it, but so did people without dyslexia. So we found that most rulers help dyslexic people, but which were better for whom? Well, the underline worked really well. The light box worked really well for the dyslexics. So if we go back to this notion that everyone benefits, we also go to the notion that it's individual and that no one ruler is really best for everybody. Everybody has a different reaction to different ones. So most rulers benefit, most people benefit, different people benefit from different designs. And then the kicker from all this is that it turns out that dyslexic readers did better with rulers that were designed by dyslexics. And the converse was also true. The non-dyslexic readers did better with the rulers by non-dyslexics. So the other takeaway from this, when we get to inclusive design, it's also a reason for including different kinds of designers in the work that we do. So I only show this as an example of how quickly we can field a study with this new virtual reading lab that we've mounted. And we do invite anybody who's interested to join us in this sort of quest for personalized reading. We're happy to field questions. You can certainly contact me, or you can go and try the Readability Lab yourself at readabilitylab.xyz. And now I can take questions.
Right. So far, I haven't seen any questions in the chat pod. Would anyone like to ask any questions? Just go ahead and put your question in the chat pod. I can also let me know, and I can also unmute you so that you can ask your question or have a discussion with your voice.
Donna and Rick, I have a question.
Sure.
So this can be used if I can use this mode when I use Adobe Reader on anything that's sent to me as a PDF. Is that correct?
So liquid mode is available in Adobe Reader on any mobile device for any PDF that's sent to you. So a phone, a tablet, or a Play Store compatible Chromebook, yes. We cannot 100% convert every single PDF. We're still working on a number of things, but you know, for example, particularly for an academic setting, most academic papers work really well in liquid mode. But if you have a highly designed, let's say it's a brochure for you know, for a new car, that's not going to reflow very well. We really work best with long form text right now. And we do have a limit, I think, of 10 megabytes on the size of the file. But we're continuing. We've got a big team of people making this better all the time, and there are new features and new capabilities coming out with liquid mode quarterly.
We have a question from Deidre. Any information for how we can promote this option to students, faculty, or staff, or promotional materials? That's a great question, Deirdre.
So we can follow up with this. We do have materials online that can help you. We can make those available. Donna, I can make them available to you, and you can make them available to everybody else, I assume.
Yep.
Or people can write to me directly, and I can point you to things. We do have videos on how to invoke it. We have some lesson plans. For those of you who, we also have at the VRL, we started to put together packets of teaching materials because there's a different onboarding, you know, for Android versus iOS. We do have instructional guides and things like that, and we can put together a package and make that available to you.
Okay, there was a question too about liquid mode being available on desktop versions, and I believe you said right now we are restricted to just a mobile device.
Right now we are mobile device. The closest thing to a desktop where we run on a large screen is a Chromebook. You know, a modern Chromebook runs it really well, but not yet in browser and not yet on desktop. We are working in those directions, but we don't have them available yet.
All right. Deirdre's also, and I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name right, she also was pointing out that UNM is a creative campus, which they are. And so the university might want to consider adding to the site. She said she'd work with their director who manages the project and is a good liaison to provide faculty education areas. So I will, Deirdre, if you could reach out to us and give us any people who would be interested, we would be more than happy to talk to them.
Yeah, we also have. I'm really interested in talking to anybody who wants to introduce this to their classrooms. There's one of our Adobe education leaders who teaches at Arizona University, directs the writing program there, has been building a lot of materials for introducing these to, she works a lot with the freshman class, the incoming class, and we're very interested in talking to other educators who want to do the same and can take advantage of the materials that she's built. It's a woman named Shelley Rodrigo, for those of you who may know her.
Okay. All right. Any other questions that anyone would like to bring up? Hang on, let's just see here.
Yes, please reach out to both of us and let's see how we can get you guys materials and get the campus up and running with this.
All right, I see a couple of people are typing. All right, I'll take that down.
Oh, let me just, while we're waiting for people to type, use the Treitman at adobe.com. I'm having some problems with that readable address, but if it goes to Treitman, I know I'll get it.
And the best person to reach out to directly is Rick, just because Rick is working in that area, and I'm kind of spread across a lot of different areas, but I am more than happy to pass on any information to Rick as well that anybody wants to send. So we're just really happy to get that information.
Yep. Cool.
Okay.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us. I'm glad that some people want to help us take this a little bit further, and we look forward to having you join us in this effort.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording.
And I will stop sharing.